This morning's service is being led by the UUCP Racial Justice Collaborative. We've been in existence for about 2 years and have been meeting monthly. There is always room for more folks looking for hope, healing, as we run this marathon. Thanks in advance to Reverend Christine Dance for her video reflection and to Racial Justice Collaborative members Sandy Weir, Diane Edwards, Pete Creelman, Joan Gale, Harriet Williams, and Beverly Hart for sharing your reflections. I'd also ask you indulge us this morning in advance. We might run a little long. Transformation takes time.
Hello, my name is Reverend Christine Dance. I use she and her pronoun. I want to start by thanking the Racial Justice Collaborative for leading this service and for sharing your journeys and your thoughts with this congregation. This is a very special group to me. It's a group that's been around for 4 years. I absolutely love that it is a multiracial group committed to doing the work together to create an anti-racist world in themselves, in our congregation, and in our wild world. This congregation has done a bit of anti-racism work throughout the years here at UUCP. Through the years 2013 and 14, Heidi Singer facilitated a class called Dare to Dream. In 2014, the congregation, the minister, and the board worked with a consultant, Beth Zemsky. In 2016, Emma Stanton facilitated a workshop called Towards the Other America, Anti-Racist Resources for White People Taking Action for Black Lives Matter. Something was written by Chris Crass. And in 2018, Janine Gelsinger facilitated a class around the book Centering about racism in our faith movement. This past June, wanting to continue our anti-racism work, this congregation voted to accept the 8th principle. It says that we affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and institutions. Now, this is saying that we are, by our actions, that accountably dismantle racism. So it is asking us to go beyond just the statement, the vote, which was very important. But now we need to think about what it is that we're doing to do that, exploring what that means to live into this 8th principle. We need to continue to build a bridge between our words and our actions. Now, this is a process we will never finish. It's not a handy check mark, but you will hear from the people today. This is an ever-evolving process of peeling away the layers of racism in our thoughts, in our culture, and in our systems. And it is sometimes work, but it does not always have to be hard. It can be liberating, joyful, and meaningful to do this work. As we are all working to be more free within ourselves, within our culture, within our systems, this is the work that will have the most meaning. I invite you all to settle into these stories, to find your own stories within yourself, and to think about how you will turn the commitment from the 8th principle to words to your own actions. Thank you for being the community where we do this important work together for ourselves and for each other.
Good morning. I'm Sandy Weir. One evening at our group meeting, someone denounced recent Phoenix incidents of anti-Black taunting and graffiti. I spoke up. I want to be there for Black people in Phoenix, but I know how to be there for people from south of the border. And there are a lot more Latinx people than Black people in Phoenix. So there it was, those last few words. A lot more Latinx people than Black people. I saw pained expressions on some faces, confused on others. The more I thought about my words, the more peculiar they seemed to me, which spurred discomfort and insight and later growth. I realized that the source of confusion was my abrupt change in subject. Did I shift the focus from the acts of anti-Black racism to people from south of the border? No, I shifted it to myself. The spotlight went from some white people harassed Black people to, I, white lady, am supportive of those other people. Then I wondered about those last words, a lot more Latinx people. My words had implied, or had they clearly declared, that I'll advocate for the rights of Latinx people, but the smaller group of Black people, well, remembering the pained expressions, I told myself, where there's racism, it's never valid to ask, were enough people hurt for us to join in denouncing the incident? I dug into my words more and a litany of self-critique emerged. One was, I should know more about the rich history of Black people in Phoenix and throughout our nation, despite continual acts to tell them they don't belong here. I should learn how that history informs our present. I kept the litany, but it was time to move on. I remembered something else. I have learned truth and unlearned myth from people who came from south of the border and who have experienced oppression. They formed a migrant rights movement that addresses systemic issues. 12 years ago, I stood in support of that movement as an ally. Over the years, the trust between us grew. My friends, movement leaders, now ask me to be present, and I take risks with them as an accomplice. When I blurted out my rude comment in our groups meeting, I showed anxiety. I knew I couldn't be there for those targeted by the anti-Black incident in the same way as I am there for migrants. I was anxious about whether it could be enough to be an ally, showing support in smaller ways. After all the reflection, I say yes, it can be enough. The risk takers, the accomplices are vital, and so are those in the background supporting them. So I've grown. I see better how the UUCP racial justice group can nurture me and others on our journeys within ourselves and among groups in the congregation. I've grown especially by learning with my friend Beverly Hart to open up the group to different perspectives. I've also learned how the journey toward trust and friendship in the migrant rights circle also applies as I connect to other justice movements. I've become an ally to the campaign to end mass incarceration. Incarceration has perpetually targeted Indigenous, Black, and Latinx people and other people of color. Coalitions now assert the message that migrant detention and mass incarceration in prisons are the same and the system must be dismantled. I'll continue my within journey and also engage beyond, currently in the campaign to free all from imprisonment. And rather than putting the spotlight on me, may the spotlight be on the anti-racism work.
Thank you, Sandy. Good morning. My name is Diana Edwards. What can I do to connect more deeply with people in this congregation? And how can I do it in a way that pursues and involves an issue that I value? These were two questions I asked myself a couple of years ago. And then I joined the Racial Justice Collaborative, which meets monthly on Monday nights. Many in this group have been active consistently with racial justice through the years. I now recognize with some embarrassment that I haven't taken much racial action since the 1960s and 1970s. What is that about? Said I to myself. The answer has become clear in my 2 years with the Racial Justice Group. So we studied White Fragility by D'Angelo and How to Become an Anti-Racist by Kendi, and many other topics of current interest. This group achieved my goal of connecting more deeply with people at UU. By sharing at a heart level in a small group, I was able to feel the support and acceptance that I very much want in my spiritual community. It also helped me to become a more skilled anti-racist. As a brief aside, my understanding of how to be an anti-racist has increased in the last couple of months since I took action and joined Beloved Conversations. And the benefit of this group is you get to make friends with UUers across the country. So back to my question of how I let racial justice go in terms of my consistent attention to it for 40 years. The answer in part is white supremacist culture. We're all swimming in it, but like the fish, we don't recognize it. For example, white supremacist culture values quick achievement of concrete goals while at the same time being nice and avoiding conflict. Achieving racial justice is not a quick fix. It also invites both internal and external conflict. I've used my personal shortcoming of perfectionism. I don't know enough yet, and I might make a mistake. Of course you will, Diana, to stop me. I've used my shortcoming of conflict avoidance. If you speak up or step out, there might be trouble, to keep me from manifesting active anti-racism. Note to self, those just aren't your own personal shortcomings. Those shortcomings are part of racial, white supremacist cultural conditioning. Well, funny thing, now that I recognize this fact, I'm actually being more gentle with myself and more forgiving of my mistakes. So here I am, introverted qualities and all, blushing, probably stammering, but speaking out nevertheless. I celebrate that UU has adopted the 8th principle and has inspired and motivated me to take action. Thank you for being a supportive and accepting spiritual community.
Hi, I'm Pete Creelman. I'm very happy to be back in our very special sanctuary again. I'm going to share with you my reflections on me and racism. I never thought of myself as a racist or even having racist thoughts or tendencies. After all, I was a Northeasterner who hailed from the city known as the Big Apple, or New York. My city was never known as a seat or hotbed of racism in America. The 2 books we studied and discussed in our Racial Justice Collaborative started me on the path to question my deeply held assumptions and attitudes about race and racial relations. These books weren't easy to read, digest, and discuss. While at times they were painful to read, they did broaden my understanding and perception and view of people of color. I was a single child of parents who were definitely progressive, liberal, politically. My mother never uttered any kind of racist slur or derogatory remark about people of color. It was different from my father. I remember him telling me about some kind of business encounter he had with a black man. They had a dispute. I believe he hired this man to do some work, and my father was displeased with it. He told me about this when I was in my mid-teens. In their argument, he said, the black man wielded a hammer in a threatening way. I saw how upset he was about this incident. His underlying message was, beware of black people. Be careful relating to them and be ready for anything that they might do that might harm me. That message had sunk into my subconscious. Looking back now on what he told me, I wondered, was my father a closet New York racist? And what about me? I graduated with a bachelor's in sociology, anthropology, and a minor in political science from Antioch, very progressive Antioch College in Ohio. I went on to get to grad school at UC Berkeley, also known for its liberal progressive tendencies, earning a master's in city planning. Two educational institutions with strong liberal progressive reputations. They were as far from being racist as you could imagine. So how could I be a racist? In my younger years and early adulthood into my early 30s, I had little contact with people of color. I went to grad school at UC Berkeley. In my younger years and early adulthood and into my early 30s, I had little contact with people of color. Then in my second planning job, shortly after moving to Miami, Florida from Syracuse, New York, an incident happened that caused me to question how free of racism I really was. I was living in Northeast Miami, which had a mixed racial population. While I didn't encounter many people of color, there was a small Haitian community. I was riding my 10-speed bike on a nearby sidewalk to my apartment and on a pleasant afternoon after work. Approaching me was a young black man riding what looked like a kid's bike. I suspected nothing. All of a sudden, as he got closer to me on his smaller bike, he crashed himself broadside into my bike and myself. It caught me completely by surprise. He didn't apologize to me for the collision. I quickly realized he wanted to get me off my bike so he could steal it. I stood my ground and I yelled at him, "What the hell are you doing?" I refused to get off my bike. Then I yelled at him, "Boy, get out of here." He was not a boy, but a young man whom I believe was Haitian. My order seemed to inflame him. I put my fists up, and he was quite close to me. He then swung his fist and socked me in the jaw. I was both fearful and angry. I was not really well prepared to defend myself, and I didn't expect to be in a fisticuffs. He was able to get me off my 10-speed, jumped on it, and rode away. I stood there, stunned. His assault succeeded, and he and my bicycle disappeared. My report to the Miami police yielded no recovery, just a petty theft for them. Looking back on what happened and how I reacted, what stood out for me was my calling him boy. That way of referring to a younger or older person of color, such as someone who was a slave in the South, was right out of Southern racist lexicon. But I was from New York City. I wondered how free of racist thinking and racism I was in my early 30s. I also questioned whether this incident in which my 10-speed bike was stolen had reinforced my father's original warnings to me as a teenager, beware of black people. Something else happened to me more positive in Syracuse when I met a young couple at the Unitarian Society or church where we were both members. I became quite friendly with them and liked them a great deal. He was Mike Mitchell, and I forgot his wife's first name. Mike worked as an electrical engineer for one of the larger manufacturing companies there. Before I left Syracuse in June 1972 and moved to Miami, Mike, his wife and family had moved to Southern California, where he took a new job with Hughes Electronics. I then lost track of Mike and his family. Years later, I had moved from Miami in 1983 to Southern California and Idlewild to live with my mother for a year. Then in 1984, I moved to Orange County, adjacent to LA County. I was attending a lecture meeting. During an intermission, I spotted a man sitting in the audience whom I recognized from somewhere, but couldn't place him how I knew him. I went up and introduced myself, saying, "I recognize and know you from somewhere, but can't remember where." He also said he recognized me. We talked, and it turned out he was my former Unitarian friend from Syracuse, Mike Mitchell. We were both delighted to be reunited again. We renewed our friendship and contact. After I moved out of Orange County to Riverside County, I kept in touch with Mike. His wife had passed on. When I'd revisit Orange County to see various friends, I always made it a point to call Mike and get together for a meal and some good conversation. He also hosted me several times at his apartment when I visited the area. I appreciated his depth of knowledge and understanding in our stimulating conversations. In one of our conversations when we were walking in his neighborhood, I learned he was an African American. He was so light-skinned, lacking some usual appearing African American facial characteristics, that I thought he was white. I was surprised and asked him, "You're actually an African American?" "Yes," he said. I'm pleased to say that it never changed how I perceived or what I thought of Mike. He was my good friend, and I always sought him out when I visited his city in Orange County. Mike was about 10 years older than me, but he never looked his years. He's the only African American I can say I ever had as a very close friend for many years. I later learned that Mike had passed on. I felt a real loss of a good friend. I still have something of his in my master bedroom. I'd purchased a beautiful, many-drawer, large chest of drawers from him 3+ decades ago, which I still use and cherish. Something to remember my good friend Mike by. Looking back now on our friendship and relationship, I wondered how I would have been affected if I had known from the very beginning that Mike and his family were African Americans. Would I have been as open to get to know him and build a friendship? I may never have asked myself this question if I hadn't participated in the Racial Justice Collaborative group. I do know that my participation in the RJC and my reading these two important and mind-expanding books has helped me to better see people beyond the superficial aspect of their skin color. Certainly, my friendship with Mike Mitchell was an object lesson for me about looking beyond a person's skin color to their inner essence, core beliefs, and behavior. I know that I can now better identify with people of color, and I'm aware of the challenges they have faced in our historically predominantly white society and the terrible things that they have experienced as a result of our structural racism and racist thinking. I can more easily put myself in their shoes and see life from their perspective. I actively seek documentaries and stories about the lives of African Americans who have succeeded in our society against all odds, such as Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and others in the arts, literature, and so on. My racism or racist thinking or attitudes are still a work in progress. I still carefully monitor my perceptions and assumptions about people of color. I've made progress in reaching a point, as Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King said, to not judge people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. His story and what happened to him greatly moved me. His life was Jesus Christ-like in the way he lived it and how it ended. His injustice really troubled me. I don't believe that I could have ever said that 40 or more years ago, so I continue to evolve. And I feel like, in my speaking from the heart, that I am helping to inaugurate a new anonymous group, Racism Anonymous.
Thank you, Pete. Good morning. I'm Joan Gale, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm such a work in progress. In 1971, when my white ex and my son and I adopted a black child, the agency asked, "Do you think you can handle the cultural and racial issues that might arise?" That's all. Could we handle it? Well, I naively said yes. Adoption agencies at the time just wanted to place children in any home with love. It's better than no home. Since the wait for a white infant was 7 years and we could take a black preschooler within months, it was a good option for us. We were so very happy. No ongoing support group was offered, and we didn't know enough to seek one. We picked up Lisa in Pennsylvania and drove to Minnesota. On our first stop, we noticed that people either shied away from us, or we could see them whispering behind their hands, or they were staring at us. My stomach turned over, but we got busy with the children and we just forgot about it. Much later, Lisa had said to me that she felt it, and I said, yeah, we felt it too. I didn't know what to say other than you're loved, and it is going to be hard for all of us sometimes. Love is essential, but it isn't enough. I needed people to talk to about that. In the growing up years, we had many incidences of misunderstanding and racism. Sometimes it was daily. In fact, most of the time it was daily. After a fight in grade school, Lisa called a boy Whitey. Well, at the time, none of us adults knew what to say about that. I secretly felt that she had gotten some revenge, but I never shared that with her. Of course, my ex and I talked about words that hurt. We talked a little bit about history. We gave her lots of love and some discipline, but I never handled the depth of that comment. I needed a group like the Justice Collaborative to process that. My reaction to this and many other incidences was to hold back, ignore some, get angry, defiant. Sometimes I tried to educate, and sometimes I was compassionate. After all, aren't we all working on this? But it's tiring and it takes a toll. And I don't want to defend myself and my family. We shouldn't have to. Would I ever develop a comfort level? I don't know. There wasn't a group to help with that at the time. I didn't know of one then, but I did find a black big sister, and that helped all of us. It's better sometimes now, but the discomfort can still sneak up on me. Recently, Bill and I picked up my granddaughter from a black barber shop. When I walked in, all conversation stopped, and they turned and stared. My stomach turned over, and I could feel that fake smile freeze on my face. Afterwards, Dominique and I spoke about that. She told me that sometimes she feels that when we go to restaurants and it's all white people. So it's good to share all that. It's love, it's connection, and it helps us understand what the world is still like and how we still need to work on all these issues. My family feels better knowing that I'm in this group, racial collaborative group, because I have some place to go to talk about this if I choose to. Racism is still daily, and my family and I do acknowledge that. So I'm still learning and growing with all the rest of us and our institutions. It helps to interact with multicultural situations and to talk about it. I must choose my communities carefully, making sure they understand and they're working on justice. I need comfort and challenge as I learn. One of those communities is the Racial Justice Collaborative. After all, I'm still a work in progress, as we all are.
Good morning. I'm Harriet Williams. I became involved with the Racial Justice Collaboration about a year and a half ago, shortly after George Floyd was murdered by that policeman whose duty it was to protect people. When the 9-minute, 29-second video showed so blatantly the violence against Black people in our country, I went to Bev Hart and asked her, "What can I do?" Bev's answer was to read, read, and read. She also suggested that I join the Racial Justice Collaborative. The reading and discussing that I have done since then, especially in conjunction with the collaborative, have kept that concern alive for me. I have been lucky enough to know Black people on a regular basis, at least until I came to Arizona. In elementary school and junior high school, I attended a laboratory school at Ohio State University, where they tried various teaching techniques and made sure they had students from as broad a range of backgrounds as possible. About 10% of our classmates were Black. Since our classes were small, we were all together every day. After college, I worked in New York City and in Los Angeles. I had Black coworkers, Black superiors, Black subordinates. I dated Black guys. A couple of times I was the only white person at a party. Some of these people are still Facebook and email friends. In some, I have been privileged to live among people from a mixture of cultures. What I am severely lacking in is an understanding of how racism is a built-in part of our society. Our meetings and the readings that we have done have helped me be able to see that our everyday racism is not analogous to sharks swimming in the ocean, but to the ocean water itself. Racism surrounds us to such a degree that it's hard for me as a privileged white person to even notice it. My growing understanding of this has been important in helping me move along to an understanding of what I may be able to accomplish. My involvement with the Racial Justice Collaborative has also with the beloved Conversations class that I'm taking now, brings home how greatly the world we live in is drenched in white privilege. Aside from joining the NAACP and writing to my government representatives, I haven't yet actually taken overt steps to improve the situation, but the Racial Justice Collaborative keeps me focused on what is important. I'm getting clearer and clearer ideas to answer the question, what can I do?
Good morning. My name is Beverly Hart. When I first heard about the Racial Justice Collaborative, I was not sure that I wanted to participate, but my interest was piqued. I knew the Reverend Anthony would be an excellent leader, and I hoped that I could not only add to the group, but that it would also assist in my continued spiritual growth. Although I wasn't able to attend often the first year, when I did attend, I realized that the group was not discussing only surface issues, but items which required being fully present. I learned that those who were involved were entirely interested in understanding racial issues in this culture. For me, this meant that people did not want to only be seen, as we often are, smiling on Sunday mornings, but it was a place where we could see each other in depth. Over the years, I have heard that I should be over the past. And let me say that I would love to be over the past. But it doesn't happen when I hear the names Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, and many others. There are many who state that they are tired of speaking of the problem. Well, let me say that the justice group understood I am tired of living the problem. There are few in this congregation who will need to have, quote, the talk, unquote, with their children or grandchildren. The justice group was willing not only to listen to my pain, but to try to understand the difficulties that many people in this country experience daily. The indigenous people, the Asian people, the Latinx people, the LGBTQ plus people, and other non-dominant groups. These are people who have their lives affected from the time of birth to the time of death. Seeking justice not only affects people personally, but also their families, friends, and loved ones. The justice group was not about listening to blame as much as acceptance of examining various aspects of the problems of the divisions in this country. I felt that this was one group where I could be honest, because no one was in the group by force, such as is the case with the mandatory groups when racism or sexism is discussed in places of employment. I know that being in the justice group is not going to make the white members, quote, card-carrying members of non-dominant groups, unquote. But it has, for me, been a place where I could, for example, talk about looking for an apartment and seeing an ad in the newspaper and then being told that nothing was available. And then my white girlfriend, who was with me, went into the rental office immediately following me and was told they would be happy to show her the apartment available. The difficulty with people telling me to get over it is it doesn't happen. My psychic has been permanently damaged, and I feel the Justice Collaborative was one group trying to comprehend that forever lasting damage. My personhood has been violated many times, both directly and indirectly. Telling me to get over it is something I never heard from anyone in the Justice Collaborative. Another example is when I tried to obtain information from Ancestry regarding my family lineage. I could only find information back to my great-grandfather, which means I'm limited in trying to give my grandchildren information on my family heritage. I will never know which ancestors made it through the Middle Passage. How can I explain to my grandchildren why I not only have DNA from Nigeria, Benin, Togo, Cameroon, Congo, Western Batu, Mali, and the Ivory Coast, but also Germanic Europe, England, Scotland, Wales, and Norway. I'm a United Nations all by myself. I bet that would be a hell of a story to tell to my family. I'm supposed to get over racist behavior, but how do I explain to my 7-year-old granddaughter regarding Mr. Floyd's death when she asked me, quote, why do police kill Black people when I thought they are supposed to help, unquote. On September the 24th of this year, at the Winterville Charter Academy in North Carolina, it was reported that a teacher told the black students that they would have been slaves if not for the Constitution. What she didn't say was that in violation of the Constitution, the strongest, the best, and the brightest were kidnapped from their homeland by the thousands in the prime of their life to work to build the United States into the country that it is today. The Justice Group helped me to continue to understand that there were people who wanted to know the problems because they belonged to various ethnic organizations or had friends or family members from various non-dominant backgrounds. The important thing about the Justice Group for me is if one starts to understand the racist attitudes toward one group, it leads to understanding the racist and sexist attitudes toward other groups. I joined the group because even though I understand the difficulties toward my group, I also need to continue to be aware of the negative attitudes toward many other groups in this country. I joined the group because there's always room for growth and patience and understanding. I particularly liked our check-in time so that those who are dealing with personal, cultural, or community issues have a time to safely unburden ourselves. I am thoughtful that my grandchildren will inherit a world that is not perfect, but better than the world into which I was born. I know this because there is a predominantly white congregation in this country where the Justice Collaborative does exist. Thank you.